Have you ever wondered why certain pleasures, no matter how thrilling, always leave behind a strange emptiness? Why even after achieving what you once believed would complete you, there's still a silent, haunting sense that something is missing? The truth is unsettling. What we call pleasure might not be pleasure at all, but a carefully disguised trap. In a world addicted to stimulation, the constant pursuit of pleasure has become our collective religion. We chase recognition, power, beauty, success, believing they will bring fulfillment. But what if these desires are not signs of freedom, but symptoms of spiritual disconnection? What if pleasure, when pursued without awareness, becomes a prison of the soul, a false light that leads us further away from our essence? Today you're going to discover a story, not just of one man, but of all of us. The tale of Julian Sorel is more than a character study. It's a mystical mirror, reflecting the deep psychological patterns that govern your behavior, your desires, your suffering. We'll unveil the hidden forces, childhood wounds, brain chemistry, societal illusions that silently shape your pursuit of happiness, and we'll explore the ancient spiritual wisdom and psychological insight that can free you from this invisible loop. If you've ever felt like you're constantly striving but never arriving, like you're being pulled toward goals that don't feed your soul, then this video is for you. You're not lost, you're being called to remember who you truly are beneath the noise, beyond the mask, behind the performance. And what we're about to reveal might shift the way you see pleasure, ambition, and even yourself. Before we dive in, take a moment. Many people watch our videos without subscribing. If you feel a spark of truth in what you've just heard, that inner resonance that says, "This is for me," then join us. Subscribe now to Celestial Truths and stay until the end, because what you're about to hear may not just change how you think, it may awaken something you've long forgotten. Julian Sorel's story begins not with dreams but with a wound. Born into a world that never truly saw him, he carried the ache of invisibility like a second skin. His ambition wasn't born from inspiration, it was born from humiliation. Rejected by society, belittled for his humble origins, he wasn't reaching for the stars out of passion, but out of desperation. He longed not just for success, but for existence, to be someone in the eyes of the world. And in this deep longing he mistook recognition for meaning. What he truly craved was to feel real in a universe that seemed to ignore him. Yet instead of turning inward, where spirituality begins, where the soul whispers, he ran outward, hoping that achievements would drown out the silence inside. Every move he made was a step away from his true self. Like many who grow up in the shadows, Julian became a performer in the theater of the world. He studied the powerful, mimicked their gestures, mastered their language, not because he believed in their values, but because he feared being nothing. He was chasing the illusion that status could erase shame, but what he didn't realize is that the soul doesn't heal through applause. The true universe, the one of symbols, synchronicities, and silent mysteries, does not reward masks. It calls for essence. Julian, however, was wearing the costume of significance while starving for authenticity. His ambition, rather than freeing him, made him a prisoner of the image he built. Pleasure became his compass. Each victory, each conquest, each moment of admiration gave him a fleeting high, a flash of spiritual intoxication. But the effect never lasted. Like a mirage in the desert, the more he chased, the further peace seemed. His brain, like all of ours, was wired for novelty, the dopamine reward system pulling him forward, then abandoning him in the emptiness of arrival. This is the shadow of modern pleasure. It excites, then disappears. And so Julian, like countless seekers today, was trapped in the cycle of more power, more beauty, more attention, but never more connection. The universe was sending him signs, through restlessness, through disillusionment, through quiet existential fatigue, but he had forgotten how to listen. Carl Jung once said that the greatest tragedy is when a man devotes his life to climbing a ladder, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. Julian was that man. His ladder reached into the social sky, but the stars he truly needed were buried within. He rejected his roots, masked his pain, and idolized a version of himself that had no soul. What he feared most was not failure, it was irrelevance. And in trying to escape that fear, he became disconnected from the mystical essence of life. Spirituality to him was replaced with ambition. He lost touch with the deeper rhythms of the universe, the ones that speak not in words, but in symbols, silence and synchronicity. And when we lose that, we begin to lose ourselves. Julian didn't have to fall. He could have paused, reflected, asked the hard questions. Who am I beneath the striving? What part of me is trying to be seen? But he never did. He believed success would make the ache disappear. Yet the ache was sacred. It was the call to come home to himself. In many ways, Julian represents all those who confuse ascension with awakening. He reached upward, but not inward. And so we begin to see the first shadow of pleasure, the illusion that becoming more in the world will make us whole inside. But this is only the beginning. For as Julian climbs the tower of validation, we are led into a deeper pattern, the pursuit of pleasure itself, and the hidden emptiness that always follows behind it. Pleasure, for Julian, was never just about enjoyment. It was a conquest, a symbolic trophy, a declaration that he had defeated the limitations imposed on him by birth and fate. Through seduction, manipulation, and social climbing, he attempted to etch his presence into a world that once ignored him. Each romantic victory, every political gain, every fleeting moment of power became proof that he was no longer invisible. But there's a hidden cost to this kind of pleasure, a price inscribed not on paper but on the soul, because when pleasure is used to compensate for internal emptiness, it always demands more. The universe, in its mystic wisdom, does not reward those who chase shadows. It waits for those who can look into them, and so Julian begins to feel it. The strange restlessness that comes after a goal is reached, that quiet emptiness behind the applause. It is the curse of hedonic adaptation, the mind's tendency to return to a baseline of dissatisfaction, no matter how high one climbs. His triumphs taste sweet for a moment, but fade quickly, like a dream slipping through waking hands. This is the trap of unintegrated pleasure. It excites, but it does not fulfill. It is the sugar of the soul, momentarily energizing, ultimately depleting. Julian mistakes the pursuit for purpose. He believes more success will solve the discontent, but in truth, the discontent is a message. It is the voice of the self calling him home. And he, like so many, keeps running away from it. This cycle of craving and collapse is not personal. It is archetypal. It is the pattern that governs much of modern life. When pleasure becomes a strategy for proving worth, it loses its magic and becomes a drug. The ancient mystics understood this well. True joy arises not from external conquest, but from internal harmony. But Julian had no time for silence. He was addicted to movement, addicted to the next win. Spirituality was replaced by stimulation. The universe became a backdrop to his ambition, rather than a mirror to his soul. And so, even surrounded by admirers, he felt alone. Because when we build our identity on conquest, we become exiles to our own essence. In analytical psychology, this tension between outer success and inner emptiness is a key element of the individuation process. The self does not care about your status, it cares about your truth. Julian's seductions were masks, his victories were distractions. He was not connecting with others, he was consuming them, turning people into reflections of his hunger. And yet, beneath this all, the ache remained. That ache is sacred. It is not something to run from, but something to sit with. It is the door. And only by entering it can we begin to remember who we are beyond the chase. The mystical path does not demand that we reject pleasure, only that we understand its purpose. Pleasure is meant to flow from alignment, not anxiety. And so Julian's journey becomes a quiet tragedy, not because he failed, but because he succeeded in all the wrong places. He reached the summit and found no sunrise. He kissed the lips of love, but tasted only validation. He touched fame and felt lonelier than ever. This is not punishment, it is initiation. The universe does not mock him. It is trying to awaken him. But will he listen? Will we? The story of Julian now begins to mirror something larger than one man's downfall. It reflects a collective sickness, a civilization drunk on stimulation, yet starving for meaning. And in that mirror, we begin to see the next trap. Not just pleasure itself, but the inner mechanics of how our very brain conspires to keep us chasing it. Deep within Julian's mind, A hidden mechanic was running the show, a biological loop that promised bliss and delivered bondage. The dopamine system, designed to push humans toward survival and growth, had turned against him. Each new thrill, a seductive glance, a social conquest, a whisper of admiration, released a fleeting surge of pleasure. But the brain, ever adaptive, grew numb to each high. What once excited him now barely stirred him, and so, like a man drinking salt water in a desert, he wanted more. The universe was no longer a place of meaning. It was reduced to a marketplace of sensation. Spirituality, that sacred journey inward, became lost beneath the noise of craving. Julian wasn't alive, he was wired. The mystics have always warned us, what is not made conscious will control us. Julian's search for pleasure was not freedom, it was programming. The brain's reward circuitry doesn't care for wisdom or soul. It chases novelty, not nourishment. It whispers, this next thing will fulfill you. And once attained, emptiness. This is how the shadow disguises itself in modern form, not as evil, but as endless stimulation. Julian believed he was chasing life. In truth, life was chasing him, trying to slow him down, to invite him into presence. But presence requires silence, and silence was unbearable. In the stillness, his real self, wounded, abandoned, divine, waited. But he kept running, and the farther he ran, the louder the noise became. When pleasure becomes mechanical, it loses its sacredness. The ancient alchemists spoke of transmutation, turning the base into gold, the primal into the divine. But Julian's pleasures never ascended. They remained base, compulsive, stripped of meaning. His soul, like so many today, was starving in a banquet of dopamine, and while the body reacted, the spirit withdrew. The universe, in its mystical language, was offering symbols, synchronicities, moments of reflection. But the algorithm of his brain overpowered the intuition of his heart. It's a pattern we see everywhere. People scrolling endlessly, consuming without tasting, desiring without asking why. This is not pleasure. This is disconnection disguised as delight. And yet, the brain isn't the enemy. It's a tool, a divine instrument when aligned with the soul. But for Julian, it became a master. The true self, what Jung called the capital S self, was buried beneath circuits of survival and unhealed emotion. Every unexamined craving became a chain. Every pursuit of pleasure without presence deepened the void. And this void is not unique to Julian. It belongs to all who have lost the mystical compass within. The universe is always whispering. But when our lives are dictated by the chemistry of desire, we lose the ability to hear it. That's the true tragedy. Not the pain, but the numbness that follows it. A life half-lived in pursuit of sparks that never become fire. Still, there is a lesson in Julian's descent. His suffering is not punishment. It is prophecy. It reveals the truth that pleasure, when sought without awareness, becomes a prison. And the prison is not just external. It is internal, biochemical, psychological, spiritual. The cost of unconscious pleasure is the soul's silence. And yet, even in silence, there is potential for awakening. The very system that enslaves us can be reoriented, but only if we stop, reflect, and choose differently. This brings us to a deeper reflection, one offered, not by science, but by philosophy. What if the path to freedom isn't through more, but through less, through meaning over momentum? Let us turn now to those who dared to ask these questions long before us, the philosophers. When the soul becomes weary from chasing, it begins to seek, and it is in this sacred moment, when desire loses its flavor, that philosophy enters like a quiet storm. For Julian, had he paused, truly paused, he might have encountered the wisdom of those who had walked this path of craving before him. Epicurus, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, each in their own way whispered a counterspell to the illusion of pleasure. Where society screams more, they invite us to ask why. Their teachings are not abstract theories, but spiritual compasses, mystical codes left behind by those who looked into the abyss and chose understanding over escape. Had Julian listened, perhaps his fate would have shifted. Epicurus, so often misunderstood, did not preach indulgence. He offered liberation from it. He taught that the greatest pleasure is peace, and peace is found not in the excess of sensation, but in the absence of pain. A quiet mind, a simple life, a soul aligned with nature. This was his mystica. For a man like Julian, addicted to conquest, this wisdom would have felt like a foreign language, yet it was precisely the medicine he needed. In the universe of Epicurus, pleasure is not stimulation, it is stillness, a spiritual alignment with what is, rather than constant reaching for what's not. This is not the pleasure of victory but of belonging, a reconnection with the inner self, not the outer world. Then comes Schopenhauer, darker but no less essential. He warned that desire is a wheel that spins eternally, feeding itself with our hopes and leaving us starved. For him, to live without examining the structure of our wanting is to be a slave to an invisible tyrant. Schopenhauer saw the human condition not as a celebration, but as a spiritual trial. And his insight holds deep truth. Most of our pleasures are temporary escapes from suffering, not paths to freedom. Julian's endless grasping for love, power, approval mirrors this very cycle. What he mistook as life's purpose was, in fact, the mind's distraction. The mystica of Schopenhauer invites us to detach, not out of despair, but to make space for a more lasting form of serenity. And then Nietzsche, the firebrand, the awakener of souls, where Epicurus offers peace and Schopenhauer offers resignation. Nietzsche brings confrontation. He does not ask us to avoid pleasure, but to outgrow the need for validation that drives it. His call is one of inner creation, to become the sculptor of one's own values. Julian's tragedy in Nietzsche's eyes would be clear. He borrowed his identity from the world, instead of forging it from within. He lived for the eyes of others, not for the vision of his soul. Nietzsche's spiritual philosophy is not soft, it is volcanic. It burns away illusion to reveal the raw power of individuation, and in that fire something new is born, the ability to say, I do not need your applause, I am. So here lies the intersection of philosophy and spirituality, a sacred invitation to stop running and start becoming. Epicurus teaches us to seek what is natural. Schopenhauer shows us how desire betrays us. Nietzsche reminds us that true strength is self-generated. These aren't merely intellectual ideas, they are soul technologies. Had Julian embraced their truths, he might have found meaning beyond performance, but he didn't. His life remained a ritual of repetition, his spirit circling the same empty mountain. And as we descend deeper into his story, another truth begins to emerge. The haunting reality that for Julian, as for so many today, identity is not rooted in being, but in being seen. Julian didn't just want happiness, he wanted confirmation. His pursuit of love, status, intellect and charm wasn't about fulfillment. It was about reflection. He needed the eyes of others to tell him who he was. Without them, he felt like a ghost. This is one of the most dangerous illusions of the modern psyche, mistaking being seen for being whole. His identity wasn't crafted from within. It was pieced together through glances, praise, admiration. But the soul does not bloom under the spotlight of validation. It blooms in darkness, in silence, in solitude. The universe does not clap. It vibrates. And when we tune our self-worth to applause, we become deaf to the deeper music. This craving for reflection is not unique to Julian. It is an epidemic of the age. From childhood, he was fed the idea that value must be earned, proven, displayed, and so he became a master of performance. But every performance requires an audience, and the moment the audience turns away, the performer crumbles. Julian's sense of self was brittle because it wasn't self-made. It was borrowed. Spirituality invites a different path. It asks us to go inward, to sit with the discomfort of not being seen, and discover that our essence was never dependent on recognition. The mystica of the self does not reveal itself in the mirror of others. It appears in the quiet spaces between our own breaths. Carl Jung taught that the persona, the mask we show to the world, becomes dangerous when we mistake it for our true self. Julian lived almost entirely inside his persona. Seducer, scholar, climber, strategist, but beneath it all there was a scared boy longing to be loved for who he was before he performed. That child never left. He just put on layers. And as long as he ignored that child, his soul remained fragmented. The shadow thrives in this split. When we chase validation, we feed the shadow, not the self. And the universe, ever compassionate, keeps placing mirrors along our path, not to punish us, but to remind us, you are not who they say you are. You are who you are when no one is watching. This dynamic plays out everywhere, in relationships where love is confused with admiration, in careers where identity fuses with achievement, in spirituality itself, where awakening is worn like a badge. Julian's tragedy was not ambition, it was dependency. He became addicted to being reflected, to feeling real only through the gaze of others. But the soul is not a reflection, it is a flame. And that flame is lit not through admiration, but through inner connection. True belonging doesn't come when others see you. It comes when you finally see yourself. Without this anchoring, every compliment becomes a drug, every criticism a wound. He was never truly free, because his worth lived outside of him. And so, his story deepens. Julian was not just chasing pleasure, he was chasing proof. And that is a heavier burden than any desire. To need others in order to exist is to give away your spiritual sovereignty. The universe did not design us to be echoes of perception. It designed us to be expressions of essence. Julian lost that essence in the noise. But what happens when the noise grows louder? When validation becomes an entire economy? As we cross into the modern world, we'll see that Julian's internal fracture has now become a collective condition, one shaped by likes, metrics, consumption, and the ever-vanishing promise of being enough. Julian's descent into the craving for validation is no longer just a personal tragedy, it's a collective mirror. Today, the same hunger that consumed his soul now thrives in every corner of digital life. Social media has transformed human connection into currency, and the self into spectacle. Likes, shares, comments, each one a microdose of pleasure, triggering the same dopamine rush that once drove Julian to seduce, impress, and perform. But what began as a tool for expression has become a system of self-surveillance. In this new world, we aren't connecting, we're curating. We don't share truth, we showcase identity. And, like Julian, we fall into the illusion that attention equals significance. But the soul does not thrive on numbers, it thrives on presence. Consumption has become a ritual of distraction. Products are no longer just items. They are symbols of status, of belonging, of fabricated identity. We buy not because we need, but because we hope. Hope that this next purchase will fill the void, the silence, the ache. But the ache is spiritual. The void is existential. And no amount of external input can resolve an internal absence. Julian's obsession with appearance mirrors this modern disease, the belief that we can consume our way to meaning. But the universe, in its mystical wisdom, always reveals the truth, that meaning is not found in acquisition, but in awareness. And until we realize this, we remain trapped in a cycle of craving, followed by the bitter aftertaste of emptiness. Even relationships are no longer sanctuaries. They've become extensions of performance. We seek partners who elevate our image rather than reflect our essence. Intimacy is replaced by exposure, vulnerability by validation. We don't ask, "Do you see me?" We ask, "How do I look through your eyes?" Julian lived this long before the internet existed, but now we all live it. Our hearts become branded, our souls filtered, and yet beneath this spectacle, the self whispers. It longs for something real, not performative, not edited, not quantified. A connection that nourishes rather than distracts. Spiritual resonance, not a social reward, but to reach it, we must be willing to strip away the masks. Work, too, becomes a stage. Instead of being a path of purpose, it becomes a performance of productivity. Julian's endless striving for position mirrors the modern cult of hustle. We wear exhaustion like a badge. We equate busyness with worth. But what are we running from? The universe moves in cycles, not sprints. The soul requires rest, reflection, space. And yet, we fill every moment with stimulation, every silence with noise. Julian's downfall wasn't that he worked hard, it's that he forgot why. And so do we. Spirituality reminds us that purpose is not found in doing more. It's found in remembering who you are beyond the doing. The mystica of existence is subtle. It speaks in whispers, not metrics. and so the line between Julian's world and ours disappears. His hunger is our hunger. His ache is our ache. What once seemed like a personal wound is now a societal design. We are taught to confuse attention with love, success with self-worth, consumption with connection. But none of it satisfies, because what we truly seek is not more content, but consciousness, not more followers, but inner truth. The universe, timeless and wise, waits for us to remember, and if we dare to listen, we'll hear it calling us back to ourselves. But first we must ask, where did this wound begin? To answer that, we must journey deeper, into the soft, forgotten terrain of childhood and trauma. Before Julian ever sought approval, before he mastered the art of seduction and climbed the ladders of society, there was a boy, a small, fragile boy, growing up in a world where his voice was ignored and his presence overlooked. His home was not a sanctuary but a stage of rejection, a place where invisibility became normal. This early wounding didn't just hurt him, it shaped him. It whispered a false truth into his soul. You are not enough as you are. From that moment, Julian became a seeker, not of self, but of compensation. The shadow was born here in silence, and as Carl Jung taught, what we do not heal in the unconscious becomes our fate. Trauma is not always violent. Sometimes it is quiet neglect, a glance that never came, a word that was never spoken, a need that was never met. Julian's trauma wasn't just emotional, it was existential. It taught him that love was conditional, that value had to be earned, and so he built a self not rooted in essence, but in effort. He became intelligent, attractive, cunning, but not whole. His identity was a survival strategy. In spiritual terms, his connection to the universe was severed early on. The divine flow that connects every soul to something greater was blocked by shame and fear. The mystica of childhood, the innate sense of wonder and trust, was replaced with calculation. Psychology confirms what the mystics always knew. Unresolved wounds from early life become the silent architects of our adult behaviors. Julian didn't chase pleasure randomly. He was trying to rewrite a childhood script. Every conquest was a correction. Every lover, a substitute for maternal warmth. Every achievement, a plea to be seen by the father figure who never looked. He was not living, he was reenacting. The universe, however, is not linear. It works in spirals, and until we break the cycle, we repeat the lesson. The tragedy is not that Julian was wounded. We all are. The tragedy is that he never turned around to face the wound. He ran forward, hoping the future would erase the past, but it never does. Spirituality asks something deeper. It asks us to return, to go back into the memory, not with bitterness, but with reverence, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the part of us that got left behind. Inner child work, dream journaling, symbolic meditation, these are not just practices, they are rituals of retrieval. Julian never paused long enough to engage in them. He was too busy proving his worth. But worth cannot be proven. It must be remembered. The universe does not make mistakes, and every soul, no matter how wounded, contains sacred potential. The pain of the past is not the end, it is the beginning. If we listen, it becomes the gateway to individuation. And so, as we look at Julian not as a villain but as a mirror, we must ask, what wounds are guiding our own pursuits? What pain are we dressing up in success, pleasure, and validation? The past may be behind us, but it is also beneath us, like roots, and if those roots are dry, the tree cannot bloom. Julian's story reminds us that healing is not optional, it is essential, not just for peace, but for truth, because only through healing can we reconnect with the mystica of the universe, that sacred rhythm of being that cannot be faked, forced, or fabricated. And when that reconnection is ignored, something far more dangerous begins to emerge, a life where pleasure becomes a cage, and the soul forgets how to fly. Julian dies, young. But long before his physical death, something in him had already withered. The soul's quiet glow, extinguished by years of striving without reflection. His end is not merely tragic, it is prophetic. A warning written not in fire, but in silence. He chased pleasure, validation, ambition, and conquest as if they were keys to salvation. But salvation never came. Because when pleasure is pursued without consciousness, it doesn't liberate, it enslaves. The very things meant to bring joy become chains, and the more we seek them without understanding their origin, the deeper we fall into disconnection. The universe does not punish, it mirrors. Julian's fate was not cruelty, but consequence. There is a sacred law woven into the fabric of the cosmos, that what is not aligned with essence will eventually collapse. Julian lived out of alignment, with his truth, his heart, his childhood, his self, and so everything he built was fragile. His lovers left, his victories faded, his legacy dissolved into oblivion, because nothing rooted in illusion can survive. This is not just a personal message, it is a spiritual principle. The mystics, the philosophers, the ancient wisdom keepers all knew it. Real power comes from presence. Real pleasure flows from purpose. Without awareness, even the most beautiful moments become hollow. Julian never learned to pause, to breathe, to ask, "Is this who I really am?" The danger of unconscious pleasure is not just that it fails to satisfy. It erodes the soul's compass. We stop knowing what we truly want. We forget how to feel. Our dreams become products. Our emotions become performances. Julian lived like this, detached, ambitious, reactive, and in doing so, he became a stranger to his own spirit. The spiritual journey is not about becoming more, it is about becoming real. The self doesn't need success, it needs truth, and the universe, ever patient, waits for us to choose that truth. Julian never did, and so his story ends as many do, not with a bang but with a quiet heartbreak, the realization that he climbed the wrong mountain. But even in his fall there is something sacred. His failure becomes a map, a guide, a mirror for those willing to look deeper. Julian teaches us that without self-awareness, pleasure will always lead to suffering, that the pursuit of validation without inner grounding is a recipe for collapse, and that the soul cannot be bought, seduced, or conquered, only remembered. His life is a cautionary tale, but also a hidden invitation, an invitation to slow down, to reflect, to reconnect with the rhythm of the universe, the mystica of being, the spirituality that exists beyond image. His death is not the end. It's the echo of a lesson humanity is still struggling to learn. So now the circle closes. Julian's path, though broken, brings light to our own. He lived disconnected from himself, and the price was everything. And in a world that rewards the very behaviors that destroyed him, we must ask ourselves, are we any different? Or are we too being pulled into the same trap, disguised as success, pleasure, and love? The answer isn't simple, but it begins with awareness, with silence, with the courage to ask, what part of me am I trying to escape? Because in that question lies the seed of transformation, and from that seed, something eternal begins to grow. So now I ask you, what kind of pleasure have you been chasing, and at what cost? If this message stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life have you mistaken validation for truth and stimulation for connection? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And don't forget to subscribe to Celestial Truths and turn on notifications. That's how you ensure you won't miss the next insights, the next keys to unlocking a deeper, more meaningful life. And speaking of what's next, watch the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It continues this journey and takes you even further into the hidden architecture of the soul, with reverence and light, celestial truths.